No more waiting. It is time for Pacers Cavs. Round 2 is here, and if game 1 is just as important as ever in this series, is as important as ever, I have so much to talk about on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Sunday, happy game day, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, round 2 begins for the Pacers. They kick off round 2 for the whole league before round 1 is even over. It's going to be fantastic. 6 p.m. if you are unaware in Cleveland. I will be there, and I will bring you all insights from the arena because this is going to be an awesome series. Two teams that want to win the same way. How will either of them find an advantage? I can't wait. And I have a lot to talk about with this series specifically because in some ways, the stuff I talked about before Pacers-Bucks game 1 is going to apply to today. In other ways, I want to really zoom out and talk about why this series is a very important franchise inflection point in some ways for the Pacers in a way that was not the case for the Bucks series, and I don't think has been really discussed enough, and that's kind of on me leading into this series. But in general, you guys know how I feel about game 1s of series, right? It is such an important game 1s and game 3s are huge to me as moments in a series that kind of define where it's headed. The Pacers won a game 1 for the first time with this era in the last round. They lost both game 1s last year, but won both game 3s in the series that they won. Game 1 just sets a tone in a way that isn't about just that team's style is going to dominate or that team's going to roll through the series if they win game 1. But what it does is it kicks off the cycle of adjustments in a way that, again, it's probably a little overstated on the analyst, fan, whatever you want to call it side. But to me, it always feels this way where if you win a game 1, you think, oh, what we just did worked. Let's do that again and win again. And if you lose game 1, you think, oh, we got to adjust. We got to change things, blah, blah, blah. And in some ways, adjusting early is an advantage, but obviously you want to win the game. And so I've long thought that winning game 1 gives a team a tactical advantage just in that they don't have to think as hard about those changes as a series progresses. An example would be what just happened for the Pacers against the Bucks. They won game 1. They didn't have to change as much. Game 2, Dame comes back for the Bucks. The Bucks switch up some tactical things on defense. And yet the Pacers just trot out a very similar game plan. I charted all their rotations for the entire series in just one long list of every sub in order. Game 2 and game 1 were almost identical. Slight foul trouble differences in their front court in the first half. That's it, right? They generated great shots again, and they won the game again, and they were up double digits in the fourth quarter of both games. Obviously, the endings were a little different, but they could stick with a similar game plan. Even when the Bucks adjusted, they still won. But then the Bucks eventually caught up to them. Regardless, it was important for them to win that game 1 and have proof positive that, hey, this plan they have works. They're prepared. They can do this. The Bucks had to make adjustments, and it didn't even work. But, had the Bucks won game 2, the story of that would have been, oh, look at that. They made adjustments to that Pacers style. The Pacers didn't change anything. Here comes Milwaukee. They got one. So I think that is it's such an important tone-setting game. And there's always certain little things in these matchups that will, define those changes, Can the Pacers solve the Cavs switching defense is going to be a huge one, right? They've done a good job against it in the games that sort of mattered this season, but it was pre-trade deadline and Tyrese Haliburton didn't play, but they didn't solve the Cavs zone at all. And the zone switching defenses have given this Pacers team fits in the playoffs before. Let's pretend game 1 happens and it's a huge problem for the Pacers. They're going to have to change a lot of their offensive strategy. And if they look awesome against it, the Cavs will have to change a lot of their defensive strategy. You can go on and on about these things. Who's guarding who in those backcourt combinations that I talked about with Jay and Danny in the preview podcast for this series, right? If Donovan Mitchell lights up Nembhard, do the Pacers have to think about switching that group? If Nesmith lights up Donovan Mitchell, not by scoring a bunch of points, but just involving him in a bunch of actions, does that force the Cavs to change the matchups, right? The snowball effect of all these things is critical. And game 1 is what sets the tone for all those changes in every way. And so that is one reason I always value game 1 so much. And I think it's so impressive for the Pacers that they won 2 series last year in which they won game 1. I believe we're 1 game away from finishing the first round this year. OKC and Cavs, they swept. They won game one. Boston won game one and won their series. Pacers won game one and won their series. Knicks won game one and won their series. Denver won game one and won their series. Who am I missing? Oh, the Wolves. Yes, they won game one in LA and won their series. So Golden State also won game one. I believe it's possible that every game one winner will move on if Golden State wins, which is the game after the Pacers, right? It's very important. It's obvious. That's, again, going back to last year, it was impressive the Pacers won 2 series without doing that. So for 6 minutes, I've just babbled about the stuff I've talked about for every game one, and I will if the Pacers win this series and the conference finals as well. It's so important. Every odd-numbered game feels more significant to me, not like way more or anything, just in a way that it can change the direction of a series depending on how it goes. This series specifically is going to be fascinating to me in game one, just because I'm curious what direction the Pacers tip on this kind of scale that I've talked about with guests this week on this show. And what I mean by that is that the teams have similar ways they want to win. I just put a story up in Forbes about this, right? The Cavs, best offense in the NBA this year in offensive rating, best offense in the playoffs in the first round. They score a bunch of points. They want to outscore you. Now, unlike a lot of teams that want to outscore you, their defense is actually good. They have the defensive player of the year. They have a top 10 defense. They aren't just an offensive team, but I talked about this with Jay. Like their offense, in a lot of ways helps their defense because they score a lot and they can set their defense. But they're definitely more of an offensive team. The Pacers are obviously that, right? Pacers were a top 10 offense and 14th on defense. And last year they were an elite offense. They were the best offense in the playoffs last year. They're second right now. They are an offensive team. So if you're the Pacers, how do you approach this series? What direction do you want to tip your strategy? What I mean by that is I could hear the argument for the Pacers saying, let's start the series by trying our best to make our defense as threatening as possible with our resources. Play Ben Shepherd, right? Get him on the floor. He's one of their best point of attack defenders. The Cavs have 2 elite guards who can get in the paint and shoot and pass, both top 50 in scoring and assists this year, both top 40 in assists, actually. Right? They're so threatening. You need guys to stop them. Ben Shepherd can do that. But I apparently just disagree with the fan base on this, but his defense is ahead of his offense and always kind of has been. And he's a good defensive player. But if he's giving the Pacers something on defense and not offense, and the Cavs are still scoring, what's the point of playing Ben Shepherd, right? So that's something that I think will be interesting to see to start the series. Do they play Ben Shepherd? And if it doesn't work, do they just tip towards offense? Same thing in the front court. Do they go Thomas Bryant, who you could kind of argue is a defense guy, not that his defense is awesome, but just because he offers size against the front line that has Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, or do they go with Jarris Walker, who's a better defender than Thomas Bryant, but sacrifices some of that size? Or do they just go straight offense and go to Jarris Walker right away? A lot of the decisions they can make rotationally with the guys that they have will kind of tip one way or the other. And even strategically, you could think like that. Like, do they play in a way that maybe they're conceding more points than they want to, but it allows them to play faster or get better opportunities when they do get stops, whatever you want to say. I'll be fascinated in game one, what we see the Pacers tip towards. I talked about this a lot when they played the Celtics last year. Rhett Bauer and I forget when we did 2 shows during that series because he closed out everyone with me too. But I remember distinctly talking with him about if I was making decisions for the Pacers rotationally against the Celtics, I would always lean offense. I would always be putting the most potent lineup on the floor to score as possible and try to keep up or outscore them. And the Pacers were extremely close to winning 3 games in that series. And, the saying, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Like, they weren't being close doesn't matter, but they were able to almost win games in that series because they largely did that. They tipped towards offense. It worked very well. And they kind of kept up with the Celtics. And so I'm curious how the Pacers will, prioritize that this year against the Cavaliers team with a similar strength profile to Boston last year, albeit Boston's defense was better, because the Pacers do have a better defense now. They can actually say with their chest, like, yeah, we can kind of rely on our defense to help us. That's true. It's just the Cavs are the best offense in the league. And so one thing I'm curious about in game one is just how much the Pacers tip one way or the other. Do they make a lot of their decisions that are more offense focused? To me, that would be a bench group that has McConnell, Toppin, Mathurin, and Walker, and maybe Shepherd, and maybe Bryant. Although you could kind of argue Bryant both ways, I guess, for this discussion. Do they tip defense? That would be more Shepherd, or any Shepherd. That would be more Bryant. And that would, of course, influence their mixing and matching. Like, an offensive group would have, like, potentially some lineups with Nesmith at the 4 that I talked about earlier this week. Looking ahead at this series, that actually might have been on the Chase Down podcast that you guys Not on this one, but like, do they go that far? Do they just go that small with Neesmith at the 4, or are they going even bigger with like a Walker, Siakam, Turner front line? Or, you get the gist of what I'm saying. I want to know how they're going to tip because I think the answer should be offense. Not because I don't think they can stop the Cavs, although no one really can. There's a reason they're the best offense in the league. But because to me, here's what I heard, and here's my interpretation of the Pacers, right? I think even as the Pacers got better on defense, everybody thinks of the Pacers as an offensive team. That's who they are, right? Their defense got better in part because they can score so much, but Tyrese Haliburton becoming himself as an offensive threat kind of coincided with the Pacers' defensive growth too. You can only be who you are as a team. And so all these things come up to say that my opinion would be they should lean into offense, because what I heard them say too is leading up to the playoffs, I'm always curious about this, right? The week before you play the Bucks, or the 5 days you get, 4 days, whatever it was, that you get between series to prep for the Cavs. I always wonder how much a team is focused on what they do well versus what the opponent they're about to play does well. You have to look at the opponent, obviously. It's not all or nothing on that scale going either direction. But I think the Pacers do a good job of noticing, within the context of the Cleveland Cavaliers, here's the things that Cleveland does well or poorly. What do we as the Pacers, when they're thinking about this, do well that can exploit that? And so the Pacers focus on themselves a good amount in their prep for series. So far, that's gotten them pretty far. The only reason I think back to those comments and hear those in my head as I'm thinking about this series is, if they focus on themselves, they're an offensive team. And so their focus should be on being themselves, which is that kind of group. I think game 1 will tell us which way they're leaning. And I think the Pacers, despite me saying I think this could be a Ben Shepherd series, the more I think about it, I might be wrong on that. Although they did play 11 guys at various times in the first round, he'll probably play at some point, certainly. I think, but not that when I say Ben Shepherd series, and I'm talking about how much he plays, not if he plays or doesn't, mostly. But in this context, I think the Pacers should lean offense. I think that almost every decision they make, rotationally, strategically, whatever you want to call it, you could just say every decision they make should be about maximizing their chance to score, maximizing their points per possession output, keeping turnovers down, giving themselves the best chance to have a big 125 plus number on the scoreboard when the game ends. Not because I don't think they can't stop the Cavs, although no one really has this year, but because I think that's their best chance to look like the best team in the series. And I think game 1 will tell us if that happens. Let's talk about a couple more little things that I'm interested in game 1 and why this series matters so much for the future of the Pacers in a way their first round series did not. This show is sponsored by Betterhelp. The world has made a lot of progress when it comes to mental health, but there's still a long way to go. Too many people still avoid therapy because they're afraid of being judged. But the truth is, taking care of your mental health should be just as normal as going to the gym or eating healthy. This is Mental Health Awareness Month. Let's normalize getting help and encourage everyone to prioritize their well-being, because when people feel supported, families, workspaces, and entire communities are better for it. Many people have positive experience with therapy. It can help deal with big problems. It's not just about maintaining mental wellness, just like you do with your physical health. It's about much more than that. And getting started with BetterHelp is easier than ever. It's fully online, has a network of over 30,000 licensed therapists. You can switch anytime for no extra cost. You can even easily switch in just a day if you're wanting to change. We're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Locked On Cavs, your second listen. Danny Cunningham crushing it, covering that team this season. I want to talk big picture for a sec, not to be like alarmist or like too in the moment about the Pacers' long-term outlook. So this is a big series for the Pacers to kind of decide where they're at as they build their team going forward. Obviously, they made the conference finals last year. They know they're good. They won 50 games this year. Like, this is a good team. And they started the season so bad that many think that they're the third best team in the East right now, right? They're clearly good. They're still 14 wins behind the Cavs this year, right? This series could have a somewhat significant bearing on like their immediate future path in a way that the Bucks series didn't. What I mean by that is beating the Bucks, sort of expected is the wrong word. You never expect to win a series. But they were the favorites. Like, I think internally they thought they would win the series, and they did. But because it was more towards expected, it doesn't really shift your upward goals or thinking because you won a first round series against a team that you're better than. And whereas a loss to the Bucks, had that happened, the Pacers would have entered the offseason thinking, man, changes are needed. We've got to be better to reach a higher peak, right? If they lose to the Cavs, that's still probably the case, right? Changes needed to reach a higher peak. There's better teams in the East. However, there is now a scenario where the Pacers win this series and they have to look themselves in the mirror and go, wow, we're a contender right now, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean they can do anything about it in this particular run. But, if they go into the offseason, if they beat the Cavs, even kind of regardless of what happens in the conference finals, it's like they got to the conference finals 2 years in a row. They just beat a 64-win team. Like, if they're good now, it's way, way, way more likely to me that they would be like, yep, let's pay the tax. Let's just pay what it takes to keep Turner, keep this team as it is, make some small upgrades here or there, and run it. If they lose this series, it's harder to see them, they certainly still should think that way, obviously, but it's harder to see them making that be like such an obvious choice, right? And the Bucks series didn't have that kind of big picture incentive. Just beating the Bucks doesn't mean the Pacers should immediately be like, yes, let's go all in right now. We beat a 48-win team in the first round. That is now a new card on the table in this series, is that it could put the Pacers in a position where they could convince themselves that, hey, I'm in the conference finals 2 years in a row. Like, we're good now. This is a luxury level team. Let's pay the tax, right? Now, losing the series to the Cavs could also, depending on how it goes, hit different. Losing to the Bucks, pretty much in any result, lose to 7, losing 4, losing 7 would have all hit the same as like, dang, can't even get out of the first round with the score. Big changes needed, blah, blah, blah. The way they lose to the Cavs, I think, will matter because the Cavs are very good to me. They won 64 games. If the Pacers get swept by the Cavs, they'll walk out of the series and go, dang, we're far from the top of the East or the top of the league or whatever they want to use. We need to make changes to get better. If they lose in 6 or 7, especially depending on how the games go, like they got swept by Boston last year, but that series felt close still, right? If they walk out of this Cavs series feeling close, I think that would feel a lot different of a result than a sweep. Like, again, the first round, any result against the Bucks would have felt like a just major failure. That would not, to me, be the case in this series. Like, it's not fine to lose. They shouldn't just be like, oh, it's okay. They're just better. It was close. But I do think it would, like, there are different sort of tiers of the way this could look in a loss that would kind of influence their summer of decision making in terms of the feeling on how close they are or what they need or what decisions they need to make. So there's just kind of a lot more at stake directionally to me for the Pacers in this series than there were in the first round, where the first round was very cut and dry. Win should be expected in a lot of ways, and a loss would be very bad and force them to make big changes. In this round, like getting embarrassed, getting swept, losing a tight one, winning, all have different sort of ramifications on how the team feels about themselves heading into the offseason or heading into their future. They still have a ton of time with Haliburton and Siakam under contract, right? They know what their core is. They know how good they can be. But the level of, maybe not urgency, I don't think that's the right word, but the level of feel the team will have towards requiring upgrades or towards trying to, become a team that is willing to pay the tax next year will kind of come down to their result, to me. And maybe this is true for the conference finals as well, should they make it, how they play and what the results are of these series. They have finally reached that part of the playoffs where it has actual bearing. Last year's run was awesome. They made the conference finals, and then they said, yep, this is a good team, and they kept everybody together. And I thought that's what they should have done. I said so as much last summer, and at times that looked wrong this year, and at times it looked right. We'll see what happens this year, but it's not going to be like a referendum on last year. I think they're happy with the 51 season and winning around, but they want more than that. Like Haliburton's talked about championship expectations, and this is the first round that they'll play that has major influence on their immediate path forward. And I think that is a fascinating part of this series. It's not really relevant to just game one, which is what I'm talking about today. But I really wanted to throw that in because I felt like that's been kind of under discussed, and I wanted to get in there and get it done. Man, I have been thinking a lot about how the Pacers will stop the Cavs. And I just wonder how much of this series is going to come down to Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith's ability on the defensive end. That sounds so obvious, And everybody at the end of the series will say, "Oh, if not the end of the series, but everybody at some point in the series, I think will have a moment of like, oh, they got to switch up what they're doing defensively. They can't stop Mitchell. They can't stop Garland." People do that a lot with stars in a way that kind of annoys me. It's like no one can stop these players. That's why they're so good. If they can make those guys' life hard, and what we know now, by the way, is that Darius Garland's toe injury, he's questionable for game one. Even if he's playing, it's not 100% Darius Garland. I think a lot of this series could come down to the effectiveness those two have in being pests on ball. Not that they can stop them, but if they can, like what the Pacers did against Giannis, if the Pacers defended Giannis as well as they could, even though he was awesome at tired him out and really kind of cooked up the Bucks a little bit, just made it not as easy for them to play the way they want. The Cavs have a very good offense. They have great flow. Like every time you asked anyone with the Pacers this week in practice, like, hey, what's the challenge of this Cavs? Like, oh my God, they're so well connected. They play so great. Their offense is awesome. Like if they can disrupt, if those two can be disruptors at the point of attack in a way that actually knocks the Cavs off kilter, I don't think you can make the Cavs a bad offense, but just like more pedestrian than they normally are. That's probably one of the biggest keys to the series to me. Because as great as the Cavs defense is, a lot of what I talked about this with Jay Rigdon yesterday, a lot of pros they get on that end come from the fact they score so much. The other team's taking the ball at that against the set defense. They can go zone, they can switch, they can just do whatever they want. If those two players, Nembhard and Nesmith, can get enough stops to not let the Cavs set their defense 3 extra times a game than expected, that's a chance at like 6, 7, 8, 9 points, whatever. Like that's a huge, huge, huge thing to me in this series. And that sounds so obvious. Yeah, you got to stop the stars. It was the talking point before Pacers Bucks. But in this, it feels so specific to this series because it's the two best perimeter defenders on the Pacers against the two best perimeter talents on the Cavs. And depending on how you feel about Shepherd, like two of the only good perimeter defenders on the Pacers against those guys. I think Shepherd's a good defender, but might not have a big role in this series. So I think a lot of what we see could come down to that effectiveness. If they can't stop those guys at all, or they just are flowing into easy shots or lobbing the ball over Myles Turner's head or hitting Evan Mobley for some bing, bang, boom plays in the paint like they do, could be a quick series. The Pacers are going to have to find a way to slow those guys down in some way, even though, again, I'm tilting offense, although those guys are good offensive players too. That is something another thing I'll be watching out for in game one. Can they actually make those guys' lives hard in any way? It's going to be challenging. The Cavs are very good. I can't wait. I just can't wait for this series. I've had a lot of fun thinking about it and going back through the very small sample of relevant film of these two teams trying against each other this season. Tomorrow is game one. Well, today's game one. Tomorrow on a podcast after game one, Danny and I have plans, because he'll be traveling as well, which wasn't the case in the first round, to probably do post-game shows together in the arena, which will be fun. So you can get both perspectives of the game. Then I'll get a guest for Monday night going into game two. Then game two, obviously, again with Danny from the arena. Really looking forward to that. This is going to be an awesome series. Two fun, high-scoring teams. I think it's going to lead to some fun basketball for observers. And I hope that I don't look like an idiot when it's over and that the Pacers offense gives them a chance. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Tony Tyrese. This podcast is a Twitter account. It's at Locked On Pacers. You can see every episode, what it's all about when it comes out. Thank you guys a ton for listening today. Back again tomorrow after game one. See ya very soon.